And as more people roll in, I'll like to start with an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Woiwurrung and Burrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, the traditional owners of the land we conduct our business on, and respectfully acknowledge their ancestors and elders, past, present, and emerging. So, Wumajeka, and welcome, everyone. It's great to have you here at our second session, diving into results of the state of account-based marketing in APAC. If you missed our first session, you can watch that on the xGrowth YouTube page, or listen to it on the Growth Colony podcast. You can just search up Growth Colony podcast. As I said, we'd love to know where everyone is tuning in from during the session. So please make sure to post that into the chat. If you've got any questions, please make sure to put that into the chat as well. We don't have a Q&A function, so just put it in the chat and we'll make sure to document those. Joining us on the panel today, we have Leanne Chescoe, Senior Marketing Field Manager of EMEA at Demandbase, Ljubica Radoicic, Director of APAC Marketing and CX at Autodesk. We've got Shaheen Hoda, Director of Growth at xGrowth. And of course, we have Andrew Thompson, Managing Editor of Shift Research and the author of A State of Account-Based Marketing in APAC Report, who will be moderating the session. So I'd like to pass it over to Andrew to run the session today.
Thanks, Alex. In the last State of Account-Based Marketing in APAC webinar, we looked at the motivators driving ABM use, as well as the major pain points practitioners are experiencing. The panel of ABM experts from Drift and F5, and of course, Shaheen from xGrowth, were all based in APAC, so we were able to provide some great regional on-ground insights and advice. Today's State of ABM in APAC webinar is going to be based on learnings from other geographies that APAC marketers can use. What works, what doesn't, and what needs to be tweaked to succeed in APAC. As you can see from the report findings, ABM is being deployed across a broad range of diverse geographies across the region, with Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and Indonesia currently seeing the highest use. At an industry level, ABM is being applied across a broad range of business types throughout APAC. The financial sector is currently attracting the major focus of ABM activities. At the next level down, we can see there's a fairly even spread across industries. So how is ABM being deployed in APAC? As we can see, more personalised ABM approaches are being favoured by respondents. Unlike the US and the UK, where ABM is more established, APAC is a more fragmented market. As we can see, practitioners are leaning towards one-to-one and one-to-few campaigns compared to one-to-many campaigns. So let's get some insight on this from the expert panelists. But before we do, as mentioned, there'll be questions throughout, so make sure you put your Q&A questions in the panel below. So in terms of Shaheen, let's start with you. Given the survey data above in a region as diverse as APAC, does it make sense that a more strategic approach is currently gaining greater traction?
The strategic approach of ABM, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it definitely logically it makes sense where B2B organizations are being a lot more focused on the target accounts that they're going after. I think there are a couple of factors that play into that. I think the whole rise of COVID and the impact that had was a big component. I think right now tightening of marketing budgets has a big impact on it as well. But also, I think in general, the market is more fragmented in APAC, and because of that, you need to focus on those target accounts that you might have a number of target accounts in Australia, you might have a number of them in Singapore, and a few of them in other countries. So having that spray and pray or that inbound approach can become really expensive in the market. So I mean, it is developing, it is maturing, but I think it's a perfect fit for the market here.
And how have you seen the differences actually play out with ABM in APAC versus the US and other geographies across the world? Some sort of, I suppose, really tangible approaches.
I mean, I think it would be great to get input from Leanne and Ljubica as well. But in my experience, what you see across globally, when you look at ABM, what is really big in the US, you see the one-to-many model, where an organization is targeting a large number of accounts in the thousands, usually as part of their ABM program. As you shift into Europe, you start to see more one-to-one or one-to-few programs being a lot more popular there. And even though the one-to-many model is getting more popularity, it's definitely, you can still feel that it's stronger to look at those one-to-one and strategic ABM approach, or kind of cluster approach in the one-to-few. And I feel like not Australia, APAC in general is kind of coming in the middle there, where it's getting inspiration from both sides. But that's my experience looking at the overall global perspective, from kind of North America, Europe, who are more mature. But yeah, that's what I see in my experience.
That's great. Now let's jump to Leanne. You're based in the UK with Demandbase, but cover Europe and the Middle East and Africa markets. Do you have to apply a range of different tailored ABM approaches, given the difference in the diverse markets across the region?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's just going back to, it sounds really obvious, but thinking about just localization. You can't have this, one size fits all messaging. It just doesn't work. I started at Demandbase 6 years ago, and the maturity of the market, particularly in the UK, was about 1 to 2 years behind the US market. Now that gap is closed pretty considerably now. However, I couldn't use messaging that my US team had developed and were using for our US campaigns, because it was just not the right time for the markets in Europe. Particularly, they were talking about how to build your ABM strategy and team. And in Europe, it was very much like, we're educating the market on like what is account-based marketing, and having those types of conversations. And I think that still applies today to some extent, because the maturity of the market in the UK is different to that of the Nordic region, for example. So we're still doing a lot of that ABM education for that particular market. But I think it's just kind of going back to that, when you're building your campaigns and your messaging, keep in mind, will that message resonate with each of the different markets that you're operating? What do you need to change for each of the countries that you're targeting? What assets and content needs to be translated? And it was something that I think it was Ronan Bray from Drift that he mentioned in the report, and I totally agree, is the importance of localizing your copy across channels. So simply, from US to kind of UK markets, it's English with an S instead of a Z, right? Might be as small as that. And even things like, and something else Ronan mentioned, was making sure that the case studies and customers that you're referencing in your marketing and that you're using across channels are brands that are known in that region, right? It sounds really simple, but it's really effective. Because people can know, people kind of know that they're savvy if it's just a kind of copy and paste, right? And then I think from an event standpoint, when it comes to events planning, it's making sure that you're planning out key events in each of your core regions, so that you're at the places people are going to learn about, whatever particular topic that they're interested in, that your business is aligned to. And I think another part to that is a partner strategy. So that's key too. So working with some well-known local agencies who know that region really well, and buyers in that region, that can massively help.
Fantastic. Well, let's jump to Ljubica. Being based in APAC, which is also very diverse, have you experienced similar issues playing out in the region, and what is your experience of that?
Oh, absolutely. I live and breathe that with my team every day, right? And I think that whole fragmentation is quite existential in Asia Pac, because it is such a fragmented market, and just the tools and technology available from an ABM perspective are not as effective and not as efficient in APAC across the region. So let's take an example of ANZ, right? Australia, which is a more mature part of the market, and so the way buyers buy in ANZ from a B2B perspective, or from at least looking at the industry that I operate in, right, is a lot more sophisticated, a lot more mature than, for example, a buyer in Singapore, Vietnam, or Thailand, right? So their buying journey and their approach is very different. So when we apply kind of ABM, tech stack into that, and look at intent data and all of that, like the it does become quite limited in a way, ability to really reach that audience and understand, where are they in their buying stage and how do we target them, right? So that's where it kind of goes a little bit back to basics, that we're finding that, yes, in ANZ, right, we know, where the target accounts are at, and, how we need to target them, right? So this is where we can, definitely apply, some of the technology available out there. But when we're talking about markets, as I mentioned, some of those countries, right, that's where there's a lot of education. So those buying signals aren't as obvious. And that's where we really struggled, if I'm honest, with some of the ABM, right, technology out there, because we're just not able to kind of converse and not able to effectively target these accounts, because just the way they buy is very different. So there's some kind of strategic considerations there in terms of the overall approach.
Shaheen, you mentioned in the last webinar that you see, obviously ABM sort of growing, and there's various sort of ways that's going to happen. But is one of the ways you see that it'll become potentially more homogenized, the APAC market? We're talking long term.
Yeah, I think this builds on what Ljubica mentioned, where some of the technology, even though a lot of people talk about, and they're correct, where they say, hey, you don't need tech to start, you don't need tech for strategy, but technology does accelerate in so many different angles what you're trying to do. It's like pouring gasoline on fire. And because of that limitation, the data is not as mature in all geographies across APAC. So you have a pretty good maturity in ANZ, but when it comes to Thailand, when it comes to Philippines, when it comes to places like Indonesia, which you still have a massive economy and very large accounts, but your data that you're going to kind of rely on to run some of your campaigns, similar to what you do, for example, in Singapore or Australia, is just not there yet. Now, we were in that position probably 5 years ago in Australia, where the data was not there, and they're still very hard to get some of that data that you need for a pretty mature ABM campaign. But taking that into consideration, I think a lot of these other geographies would get there, where ABM is applicable and some of the big multinationals are playing. I think a lot of ABM vendors are going to start focusing on building those databases, because they're going to realize there is money to be made there, and there is demand for what they're offering for some of these geographies. So I think, in the 5 years, in the next 5 years, we're definitely going to see a lot of maturity in some of these other geographies.
Absolutely. And I think to jump in, I mean, that's why what we're seeing from this survey and from the respondents, that, the more strategic, right, the one-to-one and kind of the one-to-few approach is the way, I guess, marketers in APAC are approaching ABM.
Fantastic. I'll stick with you, Ljubica. In terms of APAC being a less mature market than US and Europe, do you look at some of the sort of programs that have been run in those areas and try to apply them, the learnings and techniques? And if so, what works and what hasn't worked?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think maybe I would say something controversial and say maybe APAC is not as less mature. I think it's probably not as digitally transformed, right, from a technology adoption perspective. I think APAC marketers have been leveraging, the strategy of ABM and kind of the principle of philosophy, I'd say, for, probably, if not a couple of decades, right? Maybe not on the acquisition side, but definitely on the kind of the growth and expansion. So I think, definitely, seeing a lot of kind of great initiatives coming out of the US and out of particularly our teams here in Autodesk, because our whole strategy is really based around ABM. So there's kind of great initiatives around, for example, lead acceleration, and how do you deploy some of the ABM tools and kind of tactics and strategies to really help accelerate leads in the funnel. How do you really layer in that tech stack, whether it's using technology like chats, or, for example, Sendoso, right, with some of the incentives to really accelerate those conversations and make the whole, I guess, account experience more personalized, right, from a demand gen perspective. And also looking at more of the kind of the account base, right, in terms of, for example, in our mid-market accounts, look at, again, how we deploy and align more closely with sales, right? So that's where the whole sales and marketing alignment, comes comes together to, again, offer more tailored and customized account-based experiences. So it's kind of a whole spectrum of things. But yes, I think what we're definitely taking some lessons learned and some tactics that we're looking to deploy in APAC, right? Because, whether innovation is coming from the US or we're incubating some of these initiatives ourselves, there's a lot of kind of cross-pollination happening between the two.
Fantastic. Leanne, let's jump to you now. Coming from the other side of the equation, how do you think learnings from more established markets like Europe and the US can be best applied to more emerging markets? I mean, as Ljubica said, APAC has been doing it for a while, but there's some components that are less developed in APAC. How do you think the best way to apply it is, and have you done that within Demandbase?
Yeah, so there's three sort of I suppose learnings that I kind of think about, and just kind of referring back to the report, one of the sort of findings that came out of that is that practitioners have a lack of experience rolling out an ABM strategy. So we've been through this process at Demandbase of educating a lot of our prospects and customers on like, how do you actually build an ABM strategy? So, my advice here, and I'm going to plug our Demandbase's certification program because I think it's fantastic. We certified thousands of people globally, is get certified, like understand the fundamentals of ABM and what it takes to build that strategy. And there's lots of different kind of levels that we offer for ABM maturity. So I would say get certified, kind of understand how you build that strategy, and then kind of where that technology piece fits into it as well. And then kind of as part of that building your strategy, the second kind of learning would be to meet regularly with your ABM leadership team. So when you're actually initially building out your strategy within your organization, you're going to take leaders from your sales organization, your marketing organization, your operations organization. And this really helps with that buy-in piece to say, right, we're going to take this type of approach. And that's really where you need to get that buy-in. It really needs to come from the top and kind of filter down so that, your sales team, your SDRs are kind of following that same strategy and meeting regularly with them to see kind of what's working, what isn't working. We have like a pipeline warriors, as we call it, internal meeting to make sure that, we're looking at our pipeline. Have we got enough that's coming from our target account list? Where are there deals stuck in the pipeline? How can we help move those deals along? How can we improve our conversion rates and our accounts getting stuck at certain journey stages for too long a period? So kind of having those regular meetings, but also reporting on success, what's working. So then that just helps, further that kind of adoption within your organization. And then the last point would be when you make that technology purchase is looking for that one complete solution that will give you your sales and marketing team that one view of accounts, right? So I think another challenge is lots of companies have a really fragmented go-to-market because their sales are kind of looking at one view, their marketing's looking at another view of their accounts, and they're not talking to each other. So it's, there's lots of disadvantages to that in terms of how you go to market, targeting the wrong accounts, missing those active accounts that are in market, not targeting buyers where they are at the relevant stage in the sales cycle, and they get a horrible experience because you're reaching out to people at the wrong time, all of that sort of stuff. So that kind of one view can really help. And I think that we're in a position now in terms of the technology side where a lot of those tools there's mergers and acquisitions that have happened, and they're much more companies now are starting to look at one complete solution rather than like several kind of point solutions. And then once you have that in place, attend those product training sessions for that technology, join the customer communities, attend customer days, really, learn from other marketers in terms of what they're doing. And I think this always be learning kind of approach with ABM, because it's an iterative process. It's not set and done. You're constantly going back, reviewing it, taking learnings from other marketers, from your other teams. So always be learning.
Fantastic. And Shaheen, what advice do you have for people trying to glean insight from their regional counterparts in the US and Europe? There's a lot of great learnings there, but how important is it to customize those approaches or rethink them from a different angle from an APAC perspective?
Let's touch on US, right? So as I mentioned earlier, you see a lot of one-to-many strategies in the US where there is a large number of accounts that are being focused on. And one of the main reasons for that is statistical significance. So the pool of potential customers or potential prospects is large enough and to some extent similar to one another, that you can have a wider approach and have a larger number of accounts under your umbrella, right? So that's the first time that people kind of come across, or APAC marketers come across ABM. It's usually from the US counterpart where they're looking at that one-to-many. And sometimes that gets implemented and the results are not there because we don't reach, in most situations, a lot of situations, we don't reach that statistical significance because of the fragmentation in the markets that we have, right? So Australian market is 15 times smaller than the US market. So you're not able to throw that wide net. But there is a lot of learnings, great learnings for APAC marketers in terms of what is happening in one-to-many, and then how can we, the maturity of one-to-many there, and how can we bring that here and look at one-to-few, that kind of cluster scale ABM strategy that we're going to implement. How can we do that, and how can we learn from there? And then looking at EMEA, where very mature in kind of one-to-many and kind of clusters, and again getting the good stuff out of there and then implementing and mixing it together. So I think those are the learnings that a lot of marketers in APAC can take from their counterparts in EMEA and the US. Take the great stuff from one-to-many in the US, take the great stuff from one-to-one in the UK, and kind of put them together. Now, I know I'm generalizing. There are a lot of companies in the US that do great one-to-one, one-to-few campaigns and approaches, and great organizations doing great stuff on one-to-many in the EMEA region. But if you were going to take an average, that's usually the best approach to take, and for marketers to be aware that, hey, if they're doing one-to-many, there's going to be certain challenges if we're going to purely rely on that in the APAC region.
Fantastic. It's a good time now to go to a question from an audience member, David. This is to any panelist who wants to jump in. Please share a story of a one-to-few successful ABM campaign and how it played out. Who wants to jump in there?
I'm happy to share something
Fantastic.
on that.
Yeah.
So we have, and this sort of method that we've used at Demandbase really helps with sales and marketing alignment. So we have monthly ABM stand-ups with all of our new business reps and our growth account directors. And with one of our new business reps, he'd come on board, he's probably been on board a couple of months at this point. So he had a pretty new target account list. So we were looking at, where can we really start to generate pipeline? And full disclosure, we use our own platform at Demandbase to execute on our own strategy. So we were looking at his account list and we're like, where are we seeing the most engaged accounts? Where are we seeing that intent data? Who's really engaging with our content? Who's visiting our website the most? And where are those, where can we kind of see patterns in there? Are there kind of accounts that fit into a particular cluster or industry? And for this particular rep, we were saying, oh, you're getting a lot of interest from financial services accounts. So let's do a dedicated Call Blitz campaign into that account. Call Blitz campaigns for us, we would include them into a specific advertising campaign for messaging that's really relevant to the financial services industry. We had lots of financial services case studies and references that we leveraged. We had a email campaign kind of running a few weeks, and then we had a week dedicated where our SDR team or business development team followed up on that set of accounts. And that was about 18 accounts on this list, so quite a small set of accounts. And they were really just making that their outreach really personalized to each of those accounts, bringing in kind of our pain points messaging for, the financial services organization, any research that we done on that particular account that was relevant to our outreach. And out of those like 18 accounts, we got probably about half of those meetings with half of them. And then from that, 3 accounts that are now in active pipeline opportunities. So pretty good conversion rate from that.
Fantastic. Did anyone else want to jump in there and share their story?
Yeah, so I can jump in with one that's kind of still a work in progress, but maybe a bit of a different approach there. So really a one to few, and identified probably a set of 5 accounts together with one of our account executives, and really these accounts that kind of met the ICP for ideal customer profile for our core solutions. So the criteria that we set out, and I think the challenge that we found there is trying to watch those buying signals through intent data, and not a lot was available. So we did a lot of kind of manual digging to understand, map out who's in the zoo, really in those 5 organizations, understand who are their C-level decision makers, what is driving them. So a lot of desktop research in terms of looking through LinkedIn, understanding, well, one of these executives, for example, a big rugby fan, right, Australian footy, and manager of on the board of directors. So really understanding that sort of personal approach, like how do we kind of reach these individuals so that we can again communicate right with them, and on a more personal level, and expanding into the organization, mapping out where do we have relationships, where we don't, and really understanding of what is that sort of sales play or sales and marketing kind of ABM play they want to approach these kind of core 5 accounts with, and then targeting them with developing kind of more event-based. So inviting them to like a roundtable, working with a third party, and getting, again, some of these kind of popular, sporting heroes to the table as a draw card, and then also doing some more kind of account-specific content production, right? So really talking to their pain points that we understood from all the research and kind of the outreach of our BD team. And so helping us open doors. So we have, I think, two opportunities that have come out of those 5 accounts that are still in conversation. So again, it's kind of work in progress, but this is maybe more of a traditional right approach. That's more of that sort of one to few, without kind of leveraging, extensive like ABM technology. But I think this again also probably talks to the research as well, right? That I guess the more strategic approach is quite prevalent in the region. I think that's where we're seeing some success working with the sales team hand in hand.
Fantastic. And we'll go to another audience question. This one's from Dean McGuinness, and I'll open it up to all the panelists. Any tips for a company transitioning from a lead gen approach to ABM?
Yeah, I think it's all about setting expectations, right? Because naturally, if you've been more lead focused, there's going to be, a lot of, it's going to be potentially quantity over quality that you may have been, measured on. So kind of getting all of that, filling the funnel with as many leads as possible. And I think in an ABM world, it's definitely quality over quantity. So you might see some of those lead numbers drop, or you will see some of those lead numbers drop once you're focusing on a set of target accounts, and the types of metrics that you're using are going to change as well. So I think it's that mind shift in saying, actually, if we're really going to focus more and shift more of our marketing budget to try and engage with this list of target accounts, there's going to be fewer leads that come through, but actually what's going to come through is going to be better quality. And we're going to focus on, surrounding each of those accounts with trying to engage with it as much of the buying committee within that account as possible. So I think just kind of naturally accepting that lead number is going to drop, but also shifting the metrics that you use as well. So kind of moving it from this leads model to really having this account lens around everything that you're doing. So first point, looking at engagement. So those kind of early indicators before, a pipeline opportunity is created. It's what does that engagement look like from my target account list? Am I surrounding or getting engagement from the full buying committee? Where are the gaps? Do we need to, engage more with the C-level and executive level, for example? Are those accounts visiting our website? Are they engaging with our content? Then when we look to pipeline, how much of those accounts from our or in our pipeline are from our target account list? And kind of as you start to kind of evolve that strategy, what you'll naturally start to see is like probably evens out that 50% of your pipeline will be from your target account list. And then you'll start to see things like your average deal sizes for target accounts versus a non-target accounts bigger. The deal velocity should be quicker for a target account. These are obviously longer term metrics, but it's really applying that account lens to everything that you're doing from a measurement perspective.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I think for us, and that's one of the kind of key shifts that, when I'm taking from a more general marketing strategy perspective, it's also to understand, well, how do you layer up and really develop your overall ABM, like account strategy, right? Wrapping it around the different sales accounts and understanding what does that sort of sales tiering model look like. And then, how do you really develop that sort of tiering with, with the one-to-many, one-to-few, and one-to-one. And then on top of that, right, looking at the kind of all of those intent signals, but really, having the sort of tiered strategy and making sure that your ABM strategy overall is super closely aligned, right, and working hand in hand with the sales team, with the sales operations teams, marketing ops to really develop a comprehensive kind of approach overall to the ABM strategy.
Fantastic. And cost and budget issues were identified as a major pain point in the survey. I'll stick with you, Ljubica, on this. Deciding how much and where to allocate the spend, is that a really intensive process that you undertake before you embark?
Absolutely. So it's really understanding, what are those kind of potential, accounts that really seeing opportunity to grow. And that goes back to really understanding the sales plans and the sales strategy and the plays, and understanding, well, where to really invest the money, what are the channels, understanding, how the buyers buy, and really going through and developing, looking at, how you allocate your budgets as well, how much you spend on technology side of things versus the different channels and the content, right? So all of that, really needs to come into consideration.
Fantastic. Are there any learnings for the APAC region, Leanne, that you've got from this in terms of how you decide on that process?
Yeah, so I think it's looking at, I think in terms of just getting budget initially to do something like this, I think the key thing is looking at the overall objectives of the company. And for the majority of companies, they're going to have some kind of growth goal in there. They want to grow by X% every year. There's going to be expansion into new markets, new product releases. And I think for those particular goals at that kind of top company level, this is where an ABM strategy is really key, and it can really help you meet those objectives. And then kind of with ABM, you're able to really pinpoint the accounts that you want to go after that are in market right now. So you're closely, working with your sales team, your operations team to understand what are the companies that best fit our ideal customer profile? What do our existing customers look like? We want to find more of those companies, and then layering on technology to help uncover all of those relevant buying signals so that you can actually pinpoint these are the ones to go after right now based on all these, intent signals and engagement that they're showing. And I think part of that, kind of advantage is getting to those accounts earlier in the buying committee, and surrounding that account with things like advertising is going to help you get that full buying committee engaged, and ultimately lead to faster sales cycles and bigger deal sizes, as I mentioned as well. I think when you're starting out, you might want to, run a pilot campaign. I think that would be sort of a key learning. Don't try and have a kind of go in and do this with all of your sales team. You might want to pick one or two maybe more marketing friendly salespeople to really test it out. So take a segment of accounts and really test out, we're going to run a particular ABM program for the next 2 or 3 months into these set of accounts, and then report that back. And something that Ljubica mentioned is tiering your accounts as well. And that's something that's been really key to our strategy at Demandbase. So we have a 3-tiered approach to our target account list. So tier 1 are our sales reps, top 5 accounts. Tier 2 are their top 30, and the rest are within their tier 3. And that's probably around 100 to 150 accounts. And then we have what we call our marketing entitlements for each of those account tiers. So this is our commitment to you as a sales organization for the coverage that we're going to provide from marketing for these accounts. So tier 1, basically for us, we're spending the most amount of our marketing budget trying to engage with those accounts. So we're spending, from an advertising standpoint, we're going to spend 2 or 3 times more advertising to those accounts versus in tier 1 versus a tier 3. and just the specific kind of programs. You might have specific workshops and events for those particular accounts as well. You're going to do higher levels of personalization, building out, personalized and custom landing pages and content. So I think tiering your accounts that's been really, really, really key for us. And it really helps with that buy-in piece for sales and again, with that sales and marketing alignment.
Fantastic. Have you got any? Sorry, Shane, I was going to.
No, I think the expense of running ABM is relative. So the question that the very first question that you would want to ask is, what is our average contract value? And if you have that, if you have further information on that, what is our average, the lifetime value of the customer, right? I usually say that DocuSign would run an ABM campaign against $1 million account and $1 million opportunity in the one-to-one tier, and Oracle would run a one-to-one campaign against a $50 million opportunity, right? They both are running one-to-one, but the way that they would approach that is different. Oracle will probably have $500,000 allocated for that campaign, and that does not look expensive for them, and it's within budget. But obviously, DocuSign, in the example, I'm giving hypothetical examples, will not be able to do something like that. So that becomes very dependent in terms of what are you looking at in terms of what is the rate of return on some of these, and then you can benchmark some of these in terms of past performances. And therefore, if we're looking at a cluster of 5 accounts, and these are some of the numbers that we're seeing, potentially we could see a return on our investment that is aligned to X. The other really important component that I think Leanne touched on is you have to set expectations, where you have to have short-term, medium-term, and long-term KPIs that you're tracking, so that your leadership team doesn't come in the last minute and saying in month 3 and say, where is the revenue, right? And you have to establish that, hey, revenue, we're really looking at revenue in month 18. So please don't come and ask for revenue in the 3rd month for us to kind of show you, hey, here's all the money that we've made from our ABM campaign in the 1st quarter that we ran it. And lastly, and I think this component that I'm about to mention, the average contract value comes into play, where I think what's really good as people get more and more mature in their marketing plan is to create a prioritization matrix for the accounts that you're going after. And you would have multiple different criteria that you would have there. But what a prioritization matrix basically does is it says, hey, if we take all the accounts that we have and put it into this matrix and we score them, who comes at the top? And these accounts that come at the top are the best fit. They provide the best, the largest amount of pipeline and opportunity for you. And again, based on those, you can go around creating your ABM strategy, because now you have the prime accounts for what you're doing, and then you can definitely look at justifying the amount of money that you're going to spend for your ABM campaign.
Fantastic. All right, let's go to another one from the audience. This one's from Jana Munn, and I'll open it up to any of the panelists. How well does ABM work for scale-ups or startups in the B2B space?
Okay, I'll maybe give that a go, but I think Leanne might have a lot of insight on that as well. I think so. ABM would definitely work for scale-ups and startups as well. I think what needs to be taken into consideration is you probably don't want to go into the most sophisticated ABM strategies. So you don't want to look into kind of one-to-one strategies. Your clusters should be potentially larger than, again, a cluster of 5 accounts could be very risky for a startup. The reason I say that is, in a startup world, capital is a lot more precious than in an established company, because you got a lot more of it in the established company. Again, if Oracle does a strategy against one-to-one against 5 accounts, and they spend a lot of money, it's $500,000 per account, and 4 of those, nothing happens there, they're fine. They're going to be completely fine. If none of them happen, they're going to be completely fine. But if you put a startup in that situation, which is cash strapped, I mean, with the current environment as well, that it's even harder for startups and scale ups. They are putting a lot of risk into one-to-one strategies that could potentially, in some cases, be detrimental. Best case, the marketing manager might get fired. Worst case, it could have really devastating outcome for the balance sheet of the company. So I think it's best to look at those one-to-many and then scale, but scale with a larger number of accounts rather than going super strategic from an ABM perspective. I don't know, Leanne, what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, I was just nodding as you were chatting there. I completely agree. So for me, it would be a one-to-many approach. And I think that is, you know, when you're in kind of scale up and startup mode, it's all about growing fast and really building up your pipeline. So I think that kind of approach can really help where you're targeting hundreds, potentially thousands of accounts to really, you know, help build the pipeline up. So yeah, one-to-many would definitely be my approach that I would take.
Fantastic. Look, let's look at some sort of trends towards the future and how ABM is growing in APAC. What factors need to be enhanced for ABM results to be further optimized in less mature markets or less developed or just different markets than geographies, such as data visibility, tech capacity, and size of market? Are there sort of some barriers that you see that can really be overcome and achieve some real growth in the areas?
I think Ljubica would be.
Yeah, I can jump in there. Yeah, I think the data right conversation, that's such a critical one, because again, yeah, just because how fragmented right the region is, and it's hard to achieve that scale, right? So it's about the whole personalization and the data and insights that's just hard, right? So I don't know, maybe in 3 to 5 years time, I'd say, but I think the pandemic has definitely kind of done, definitely, stall things as well from a strategy perspective. So I think that's where if we can, kind of get more global providers to really understand the challenges right of APAC and kind of be able to accommodate with more locally based data and kind of organizational intel, I think that would, take things, a long way. I think the other piece is really around educational education, right? Organizational education around the sales team, really what is ABM, and how sales marketing teams really need to work together, right, to really leverage the strategy to its full capacity. So I think we talk a lot about ABM and the one-to-many approach, right, but it's around how do we align and really support the sales strategy overall. And I think yes, marketing cannot be successful in isolation. Any sort of ABM strategy cannot be successful with just marketing running the show in its own right. I think there's the value will not be recognized at the end of the day because it's about the results, right? And yeah, I think the alignment with sales is a key piece there. So I think I've kind of given a round answer with just the data side of things, but also education, right? I think those two are really critical for APAC to be able to scale.
Shane, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think what I would say is, and I think Ljubica touched on it, but I'll just elaborate a little bit more. I think education is not only marketers understanding this, but also leadership and sales understanding it. It is just such a uphill battle to go in an organization that sales either has lost hope in marketing or just really don't see marketing as a decent player. And that might not be sales' fault. It might have been marketing's fault for implementing strategies that have not got resolved. But that training and education is so critical, not just for marketing, but sales leadership and also executive leadership. Because at the end of the day, you're going to need executive buy-in to run a cross-department initiative like ABM.
Okay, fantastic. I'll go to another audience question. This one's from Jason Romain. Do APAC marketers find B2B intent tools valuable to their ABM approach?
Ljubica, you want to?
I think we've touched on that a few times, I think, during this conversation.
Yeah.
And my personal experience, not very effective. I think again, depends on the part of the region. I think definitely in like Australia and New Zealand, right, ANZ, a bit more mature, the whole buying cycle, or kind of from a digital transformation perspective, is also more mature, right? Buyers, more digitized buying journey. So in that respect, the technology is kind of, definitely more effective. Like if we're looking at, any sort of ABM, type of tool, with intent data. I think the struggle, as we said before, is really in the other parts of the region, whether it's ASEAN or Japan, right? The non-English speaking. I think that's the other kind of layer to complexity, and ABM tech, which just doesn't cater for mostly languages other than English. So I think that's kind of the other component to the conversation, that I think, there's a lot of catching up, or maybe globalization or global approach, right? That the ABM tech companies need to take, thinking beyond just maybe the European or the US markets, right? But looking at understanding, the other markets, and how they can really support the customer base, across, globally.
And this
wink at Leanne.
Yeah. Well, I've got one from Ronan Bray, who was actually in our last.
So if I can add something to that.
Yeah.
Andrew,
go for it.
I think it's definitely geography dependent, like Ljubica, you mentioned, but I also think that it's important for marketers to understand that intent is not a silver bullet. It is another layer. Even if you are in a space that in Australia or Singapore, which is English speaking, it's not like, hey, we're going to implement intent. I feel like a lot of people have this understanding. We're going to implement intent, and they're going to tell us everyone who's in the market, and we're going to knock on their door, and they're going to open up their doors and be like, yes, come on in. We've been waiting for you to come, and why haven't we found you earlier? It's not the case. What one needs to think about is, it is going to be a 10%, 20% improvement on your strategy. Even if you're in a mature market and you're Australia and that data kind of works, is going to be 10, 20% improvement. And you need to kind of build that foundational pieces and then put this on top. And what do I mean by 10 to 20% improvement? So if you have tracked your pipeline where you're like, okay, we got 100 accounts without intent information, they go through these stages where we create engaged account, we create highly engaged account, then we create meetings, then we create opportunities in them. And there is a conversion point across both of them. And you got to make sure that you have statistically significant data. Now we're going to do the same thing with 100 accounts that are showing intent across what we're doing. And then how do those conversion rates change? And you're going to see maybe 10%, 20% improvement in those, maybe slightly more. But got to also remember, 10%, 20% is not noticeable if you're not very carefully measuring those conversion points. If your company is not to the level of maturity that you have those data very clearly, and you can just change that one variable and see the difference, you're going to have a very hard time justifying an intent data 6 months, 12 months down the line for why you made that purchase.
Yeah, I think intent is that's just one part of the puzzle. I agree. It's definitely not the silver bullet, and it's same with, like, we're not just going to use kind of one channel. We're going to use this multi-channel approach. We're going to work together as a sales and marketing team. And going back to Shaheen's point about building your target account list, like that's the key part of it, really looking and understanding, like, who are our best fit accounts and how can we find more of those? And you just look at your existing customer base, right? And how can we find more companies that fit this same criteria? So I think that the ICP part is key, and then tiering those accounts. And as Shaheen mentioned, there's lots of models and kind of matrices out there that will help you map those accounts in terms of how do we tier these, what should be a tier 1 account, and it would be most likely, what is the potential revenue of that account. So I think the tiering and getting that ICP right is correct. Then layering on other technologies like intent data, which can be really helpful to help with that prioritization piece, but it's also looking at it from an account level, because one intent signal from an individual within the account doesn't necessarily mean that account's to buy. It's building up that kind of engagement score at the account level to be like, they're showing lots of these different buying signals, and being able to get that insight from what are multiple buyers doing within that account. Somebody going in and downloading a white paper doesn't mean that they're ready to be followed up by your sales team. So really looking at that overall account engagement, I think, is really key.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We'll go to the question from Ronan Bray from Drift, who was, as I mentioned on the last webinar. This is, again, open up to the panelists. What tools and platforms do you rely most on for ABM?
So, as I've said before, we use our own technology, so we use Demandbase.
Yeah.
But we also have, and Ljubica mentioned Sendoso, we use that as our direct mail tool. We have chat tools, we have, trying to think what else now, marketing automation, CRM. Those are our key tools that we use.
Ljubica, did you want to add? I know you spoke on it before, touched on it, but was there any sort of key points you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we have a kind of a different ABM tech stack, and actually we're exploring other tools for APAC. And I think I mentioned just the kind of the language issue. So we're definitely on the search for, and again, I'm not going to probably mention any vendor names on today's call, but yeah, definitely exploring some that have more local language capability. And layering that in with, as I mentioned, one of them is Sendoso for DM. Also looking at, chats, the CRM, so the usual tech stack. Also, for example, more for kind of content marketing. So Uberflip is one that we use more for like, tailored content. So there's, quite a comprehensive tech stack. I think for us, definitely the piece that we're exploring is, ABM and testing a few different dedicated ABM tools for the region. I think that the other challenge is proliferation of tools, right? And I think, the danger that we're seeing, globally with some of the teams, but also with not just in Autodesk, right, but beyond, like some of my colleagues as well, that, they might have 2 or 3 different ABM tools in tech stack, and that just creates kind of chaos with data and, proliferation of, the single source of truth, right, becomes a lot more difficult. So I think, it's kind of the overall summary there.
Fantastic. And we were touched on budgets and resources before, and it's sort of timely in the fact that, there's obviously worse than global economic conditions playing out across the world. Is that likely to hamper ABM growth in APAC, but also in other parts of the globe? I'll open that up to anyone who wants to go for it.
I actually think it's, at this time, you need to adopt an ABM approach more than ever, because no company can really afford to waste any time or budget trying to market or sell to accounts that, are not a good fit, that aren't in market. So I think actually now is a good time.
Is it a bit the case that it might be a bit harder to get over the line and convince people to adopt the approach if it looks more expensive from the initial outset?
I think it's going back to what could the, again, testing it out and doing a pilot to really test out the model, I think is where I would start, and kind of proving out where that works as well. And almost kind of looking at, what is the cost of not doing anything and missing those active opportunities? What is actually the cost of doing nothing to our business? I think that's something worth reviewing.
Fantastic. Shaheen, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I'll just echo what Leanne mentioned. I think first of all, we're on a panel of ABM nerds, right? So got to take that with a grain of salt. Yeah. But I think that's definitely the case where you're being a lot more targeted on what matters, right? And I think in most financially challenging situations, the magnifying glass comes on and you got to show results. I think the other reason that most companies see ABM expensive is because they don't have proper measuring systems for some of their other marketing activities. And they can't go and talk about their inbound strategy of like, okay, we have all these leads. Can you show me exactly how much of that turned into revenue? Like, did we get 10,000 leads and 5 of them turned into customers? That visibility is a bit murky usually in traditional companies that are dealing with MQLs, SQLs, and leads. And therefore, when you come and say, hey, now we're going to focus on, just like Ljubica said, 5 companies, and we're going to get 2 meetings, then you're like, oh my God, only 5 companies? No, that's not gonna, the cost for lead is going to be huge for that. I can't afford that. But that end result is not measured properly from some of the challenges, some of the other marketing activities. And this is potentially a not a challenge, but one of the things, because ABM, that becomes super clear. You see what goes in and what comes out, and you know the accounts. That's a bit of a challenge, where in the other situation, this end is a little bit murky and hard to see the full picture.
Okay, fantastic.
Maybe I wanted to add maybe another lens or another kind of way of looking at things, especially with a tough economy, right, and budgets tightening, really applying the whole ABM philosophy and approach to your existing customer base, right? Because it's always more expensive to acquire new customers than to retain existing ones. So really wrapping your hands around your existing customer base, looking at, how can we grow these accounts? How can we nurture them? How can we drive greater engagement? And again, this whole ABM, approach, not just on the acquisition side, but also looking at on the post-purchase and with the existing customer base, right? So how can we kind of ensure that we're retaining and growing our customer base? And again, I think the whole approach, right, and the tools and tech can add a lot of value on the customer success side and on the growth and expansion side of demand gen.
Fantastic. And obviously we've done the state of ABM in APAC and looked at where things are at the moment, but looking forward, what do you see as the definitive trends and changes that may play out and impact the ABM use across APAC? I'll give that to you, Shaheen.
I think the biggest change that's going to happen is data and more maturity on vendors in the space. That, I think, is in the next 5 years. That's what we're going to see. More organizations are going to focus on this market, and you're going to get better and better data. And I mean, we touched on this quite extensively, but I think in my opinion, that's the bottom line. Yes, you're going to have better marketers who are more trained, more educated, and the overall education of the market is going to go up. But I think the tech component is probably the most prevalent one.
Fantastic. And Leanne, your region, we'll focus on that. Any changes and trends you see playing out that will really change the landscape?
Again, I think technology, because I think in terms of the education, definitely for our region, that is, it's a lot kind of more mature. But I think it's just having those technology, the data coverage that's been mentioned as well, and have probably seeing more of those technologies really kind of merge together, so that everybody's getting that kind of one source of truth for accounts. I think that's definitely what we're going to see play out.
Fantastic. That brings us close to time, but any final thoughts from the panelists that you want to leave the audience with?
I think maybe final thought for me is end of the day, it's all about the people, it's all about the talent, right? So you can have the best tools and data out there, but if you don't have kind of specialists doing on board and running the engine, then it's hard. And I think anyone in the ABM and B2B marketing world out there in Asia Pac knows how hard it is to find and recruit ABM talent. So encouragement for any of you on today's call, definitely get educated, get specialized, and you'll be in high demand.
Fantastic.
On that note.
Yeah, on that note, that's a great way to end it. I hope the audience got a lot out of it. Don't hesitate to contact any of the panelists if you have any follow-up questions. There's a great deal more insights into the ABM across APAC contained in the report, so I encourage you to download it if you haven't and really drill down into some of that instructive detail. Thanks again, and depending on what time zone you're currently in, have a great day or a great evening.
Thanks a lot, everybody.